Welcome, aloha.
Aloha.
This is our first video post the safari we ran on the Firehorse, and the energies right now are definitely shifting. However, there's some important updates that I want to include in this video. I also want to talk a little bit about the safari that we ran because this is a new concept for a lot of people, and just discuss how to best support ourselves during this time. This is really the kickoff period. It's sort of like the beginning of a race, and like the gun goes off and everybody's off to the beginning. However, we do have a unique signature here because this isn't just like an ignition switch, let's go. There's a couple other things in the mix that make this quite interesting. So one of those is the fact that we're in eclipse season right now. And the eclipse in True Sidereal is on the axis of Leo and Aquarius. So this is really a dissolution of our self-concept, our self-identity, in order to serve the collective better. That's really, Leo is our identity, Aquarius is the collective identity. And so that those themes around that, like who we are, what we're supposed to be doing. So if you're not really feeling forward momentum right now, or you're feeling like there's still a part of you that wants to pause, you're not alone. That's part of this. You know, the Firehorse will be continuing for the entire year. It's more of a generalized energy. So we have to take into consideration the specifics of right now what's playing out. And I mean, in our lives, we've been dissolving some pretty big patterns, and it feels pretty good for us to be on the other side of that in our own personal lives, because now we can show up for what we got to do much better and much cleaner with a feeling of lightness. At the same time, on the 20th, which depending on when you're watching this video, might be today, might be tomorrow, might be the day before, is when we have an exact conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. And that energy really speaks into the dissolution of institutionalized control, religion, hierarchy, the things that are coming in from the shadows that are being dredged up. You know, Pisces really is complete dissolution. And so it's going deep. This is 150 years of collective shadows and karmas that are being purged out. Now, this is a major conjunction, and it's a major transit that's basically in effect until 2027. But right now we're at its tightest. So right now we're going to be really feeling the dissolution of those energies. And I mean, from what you've been witnessing, Amber, there's been some pretty big collective themes coming up. Can you speak into some of them that we've been seeing in individual sessions, and also some of the themes we saw in the safari?
Yeah. So what I was feeling into and what I was observing, of course, before tapping into anything within the collective, I noticed that what was going to be and what is dissolving, you know, over the next year was happening individually within myself. And one of those big patterns is those around tyranny, and so inner tyranny to self first and foremost, and the ways in which we've played into these roles and dynamics of being the controller or the dominator, whether it be in this lifetime or our parallel lives. And of course, if that's happened in a parallel, it's really just a reflection of that anyways here in this lifetime. But the other way is and how we're self-abandoning ourselves through people-pleasing, trying to keep the peace, trying to keep this all through the idea of connection, right? Because and
submitting to like dominating hierarchies that we know are not just, but we hope that we'll be safe in doing so.
Right, because at the end of the day, what this really all comes down to, however we want to name it, it's really just a nervous system response of how we have, you know, gone through traumatic experiences, whether that be, you know, something super severe, or even just like the way that we were raised, to, you know, maintain connection. And so whether we're doing this through trying to control something outside of ourselves, or we're trying to control something within ourselves. And so, yeah, those are some of the biggest karmic patterns. You know, so we're seeing that as well in allegiances that we've made in parallels with these hierarchies, these structures, these kings, you know, and these kings that are, you know, working really unlawfully with divine order, divine will. They're gaining their position through domination and control. And most of us in our parallels have made some sort of allegiance to this in order to be of service, or again, to maintain some sort of safety within ourselves. One of the other aspects of this that's been really showing up that I've been seeing is the Divine Mother. And so part of my path and my work is connecting in with the Sophianic divine Christic consciousness. And I've gone through a really expansive, deeper initiation through this journey here in Maui, especially over the last couple of days of connecting in with that level of consciousness and embodying more of that. And what has been happening here is it's showing me just how deep these mother wounds go for the collective of women, and not just mother wounds in like a generalized sense. I'm talking about the connection between women and children, and just how many women throughout time and history have felt this sort of disconnection at times towards their children, or almost forced to like have children or become a mother, or to, you know, just have children maybe at times where it didn't feel right. And again, this is what happens when we're in these karmic patterns, because individuals have lost their connection to source, right? So we're not finding divine counterparts, we're finding karmic counterparts. And so we're having karmic children. And deep within ourselves, for the most part, that doesn't feel quite right. For some people, it feels totally right. But there's a large collective of us where it hasn't quite always felt right. And that grief and that pain and the fear and all the emotions are just really coming up around this. And so, you know, I've been noticing a huge increase of women coming into my life who are also experiencing these patterns in their own unique ways. And I see how we're going to be coming together here in the near future, whether it be collectively, you know, through what we're creating, or just on their own in certain ways to help each other through this.
Yeah. I think a big piece with the karmic relationships too is the subtle resentment. So, you know, if a woman has a child through a karmic relationship, there's a knowing and like almost a resentment of the child. And that imprint is then carried into the child in some sort of like an abandonment wound. We've been seeing a lot of instances of that.
So much, of children, you know, subconsciously feeling already abandoned by their mothers, and all the different ways that shows up in these attachment styles with children. And this is something I experienced as well as a child, and I'm now experiencing with my own child. And so it's, you know, it's right in my own face, and it's something that I can't ignore. And yes, it's been uncomfortable, and it's been something that I've been wanting to get to the bottom to, but I just couldn't. It just wasn't time, and now's the time to do that. Yeah.
Beautiful. And of course, on the 17th, we ran a safari. Now, what is a safari? Well, it's a multi-dimensional voyage that is channeled in real time to address a specific theme. And everybody in that group field that participates either at the time of the safari or watches it later basically gets the benefits of it. And so in this case, it came through primarily Amber, and I was supporting, and I was taking over during certain sections and handing it back to her. We have a pretty good flow with that. But basically everybody in the group was getting massive results. You know, people were getting somatic releases. One woman was saying like her head and her neck were moving and releasing, and her spine was recalibrating on its own just from the transmission that was coming through. A lot of people were getting big visuals. They were feeling like the pulling away of these deep layers, and these layers were related to something that we didn't expect to see right off the bat.
No.
You know, we don't know what's going to come through the mouthpiece and when the safari starts, but she went right for it. She started speaking into many of the religious themes and religious programmings around the Ark of the Covenant and Noah's Ark and this whole doomsday scenario, the cataclysm at the end of the world that is subtly playing out and affecting people right now. I mean, we have a whole subset of society that are preppers. They're waiting for doomsday or Armageddon. And that was a big program that had to be released and resolved.
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about what came through during the safari and what some of the, you know, biggest parts of that transmission really were for people?
Yeah, it was interesting because, you know, our intention was to go into taking a look at, you know, basically the point of origin of these, I guess you could say, you know, trauma patterns of individuals, you know, falling into or alleging themselves to domination and control or self-abandoning through people-pleasing. And the first place it brought us to was this Noah's Ark memory, this overlay, and how, you know, really we could look at Noah's Ark as really just a reminder that when things are going crazy or chaotic or falling apart, it's this reminder that we have all the tools within us to get through the storm, to get through the flooding, to get through whatever it is that's going on, because, we can see it as this, it's just this really, that we just have all the tools. That was the main thing that came through it there. So the other interesting one that came through was the Ark of the Covenant. Now I'm still not super familiar with that. Those two words came through very clearly, but it was basically saying how, the Ark of the Covenant is almost like this reflection of that true divine will, that God essence. And it's like hidden in this vault, which is the Ark of the Covenant. And as we clear these patterns of domination, control, and really we can just call it tyranny, within ourselves, it reflects out into the collective over the next year, and we will be unlocking, the secrets of this Ark of the Covenant within ourselves. And to me, that represented really just that deeper, most purest connection to source that is not distorted by all these overlays, like this Noah's Ark, doomsday sort of thing, which is really just a program. I see it just as a program playing out.
Yeah, I think it's important. There's two things in here. One of them with the Ark of the Covenant is that in the story, the divine essence is outside of oneself, and that they need an intermediary, aka somebody from a religious order, in order to access that, right? And then you can see now we have gatekeepers accessing a divine connection. Whereas in truth, the divine essence is within each of us when we know how to access it, when we know how to bring online our multidimensionality, when we know how to resolve the traumatic patterns that lie in our higher dimensional bodies. And, if we're not taught these things, if we're not taught how to have emotional mastery and how to undo these genetic patterns, we're going to go through life getting mixed results, because anything we try to do is always seeded with these unconscious burdens that are placed upon us. Right. So it's not just a matter of sitting and meditating and accessing your divine potential. There is a little bit to it, but we're not taught these things on how to do it ourselves. We're told you need a priest, you need a religion, you need something else outside of you. So that was one pattern cleared.
Yeah.
The other one that we're clearing was really around that imprint of, the world's going to end and you can do nothing about it. And it's fated, right? There is something called eminentizing the eschaton, which is a very fancy word, but it means that there are people out there in the world trying to bring about the conditions for the end times to occur. So they're literally trying to, this is something in George Bush when he was president. There was these neoconservative Christians that were literally trying to bring about the conditions in the Middle East as per the book of Revelations so that the prophecy would unfold. Now, there's so much psychic energy pumped into that anybody who's been following those books and those mega preachers and all that, they're going to amp it up and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's how these things happen. But if you don't buy into them in the first place and you remove your consent for that and you take your power back, the program weakens. And, it only takes one person with enough conviction to break the program and actually change the reality.
Right.
So that's the thing to remember. All these prophecies, I don't care who it's, Nostradamus, some economist, the book of Revelations, blah, blah, blah. They're programs. The only reason they seem likely is because people are buying into them. But reality is a blank slate. And that blank slate automatically gets imprinted with some of these karmic overlays, some of these programs and these axioms. Axioms are unquestioned beliefs within us. They can be questioned, but we have to delve within those layers of the deep vaults of the subconscious and unconscious mind. And of course, those layers extend to the superconscious, the higher bodies that we work with. So if you want, and you didn't get to access the Safari, there's a link below. You can go and you can watch the replay. Still active, still very good, still very relevant for these times of institutional and religious dissolution to return you to your own source connection so that you can have that self-navigation to be as harmonious as possible during these times. But of course, another thing that we end up seeing is now is a very good time to be doing the dissolution work, because pretty soon in about 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to be blasting off. It's going to be much more forward momentum happening. There's likely going to be major events in the world that could destabilize us if we're not sitting in our seat without the snags and karmic hooks and ancestral hooks that might draw us into those trauma dramas. So it is a very good time to be shedding those layers right now. The collective energies are here to support that in people. Literally, you can dissolve karma so much faster. I was surprised. She ran a process on me last week, and she brought up some pretty deep buried stuff that I didn't want to look at within my own psyche. And within 24 hours, I come back to her and I had all this extra information. I had processed through a lot of it. I'm like, that was fast. It's because the environment, the psychic environment right now is so conducive for it. And I feel so much lighter and cleaner. And it's eliciting a different response from people outside of me as a result of that.
Yeah.
A lot of the time we blame people. We blame narcissists. We blame people who are mean to us, whatever. But the truth of the matter is they're not wrong. They're doing that because there's a receptor within us, a psychic receptor that they're hooking into, because there's still an open loop or an open contract with a karmic pattern. So until that is closed, until that's dissolved, and we have consciously done that, we're going to keep attracting these same situations into our life.
Yeah.
Now is a really good time to do that. And if you've been on the safari, or you haven't, but you're resonating with what we're saying, we recommend booking a session with us. We do both of us at the same time for about 2 hours. I use trifecta. I map out your core wound, and then Amber starts channeling, and she's basically finding what dimensional level it's based on, which parallel lives it's associated with, closing out those old contracts, breaking down the energies that are holding you in these binds, and also bringing online the supportive energies, the gifts that are waiting to emerge at this time. And, when we do this work, you do require integration, but it's not like, okay, go do this every day for the next 3 years. The integration usually is move slower for a little while. Feel the newness of thoughts, of energy, of emotions, lightness coming up, and start to move with that. As you begin to follow and move with that new energy, it starts to reshape your neural wiring in your brain. And your brain begins to then favor the new over the old and habitual. One of the biggest challenges I see with people is that they'll do something and then they'll go right back to their old habits. And now that change is still made, but they start to unconsciously reinforce the old and try to bring it back in. It's sort of like whenever you go and you get something done that's fresh. Let's say, you get like some sort of a treatment. You're talking about like microneedling and it's all like sensitive. You probably don't want to go and mess that up, right afterwards. You want to kind of just let it rest, and you kind of want to add cream and stuff to support it. So like anything that we do to bring about a better outcome with our health, it's the same thing with our psychic health. And that we actually just want to give rest, and we actually want to give support. And so it's a good time afterwards to spend time in meditation, doing things to help regulate your nervous system. It might even be a good time to do physical cleansing or detoxing. Next week we're talking about, hey, we just picked up some binders, and we're getting some of the stuff out of our GI tract. And we're like, hey, look, there's anger coming up. Let's detox our liver, right? Because especially when we've been in these control patterns, there can be a lot of suppressed anger. If we're controllers, we're constantly projecting that anger outward. And if we're suppressed and we're submitting to, tyranny, then we're locked in this anger, and it's tight and suppressed the body. And the minute we release those tethers to tyranny, it basically, the anger comes out of the system. People, you might get breakouts, you might get, unexpected bursts of rage coming out of you. That's okay. That's life. That happens. But you can support yourself in that process by cleansing, by, having those emotional releases in a safe environment. So that's part of the integration process, is allowing the emotions to be felt. When we ran that process last week, I came in here, I did some breath work afterwards just to kind of calm my nervous system, and then I lie down and I ran energy through my body, and I cleared those emotions faster. Yeah. So if you want to book a session with us, there's also a link below. We highly recommend it. Some of the results we've been getting are pretty amazing with people. Do you want to...
Each session has just been so mind-blowing in their own way, because we've both been doing this work individually on our own, but on our own we were not able to access certain parts within a session, and then together we're accessing this whole new dimension. And the sessions with individuals have just been not only very activating for the individuals, but also for us. we're going into some really deep layers here. And Dave has, brought that to my attention that, it's part of my moon in Scorpio to go really deep. And so when we're in session, that's the key right there. I'm like, no, we need to go deeper. And the deeper we go, the more we find the original timeline story of those core wounds. And there's just so much freedom that comes from that. And everyone's just really feeling that. Yeah.
Like one woman basically was like an office worker and just like, yeah, I'm wondering why I'm like repelling men. And then we find out, we start digging, she's like a high priestess of a like very, very noble lineage.
Yeah.
And she's moving and her body's responding and her body is downloading those codes. Mm-hmm. And she comes out of the session and she's just so alive with that energy. We cleared the elements that were causing the undesirable results in her interactions with men. But at the same time, we also anchored her into that high priestess frequency. Mm-hmm. So her life is going to go on a completely different trajectory now. Mm-hmm. That's much more aligned with the blueprint that her soul had in mind.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Another great example was this young woman who's basically been entrapped in a house dynamic with her family. And the family was totally religious programming and manipulating her into this very narrow, defined religious order. And this woman was a real powerhouse. Like she had a lot of psychic skills that were coming online that were latent. They were just below the surface. So we were able to reconnect her with those skills. But then also she's like, I don't have money to leave. And we said, try this and do it in this way. And she did it. And she comes back to, she's like, I got a house for free. I was able to get out of that environment. I was able to move forward in my life. And now with this freedom, I could finally begin to explore those gifts. I'd been trapped in this dynamic since I was born. Mm-hmm. So this was a major life shift that happened. Mm-hmm. When those karmic blocks are taken out of the way, it really changes things. And sometimes these karmic blocks are the things that are so stubborn we give up or we feel like giving up. Mm-hmm. We just don't know how deep to look sometimes. And we need a little bit of help getting there. So that's why these sessions that we do can be very beneficial. And if you know how to run this stuff on yourself, by all means, it's just much easier with two people that have, how to put it, like we're a good fit for each other.
And we all need a little bit of help sometimes.
Exactly. Anyway, I hope this video was very insightful for you on the current energies, and a little bit, if you did journey with us on our safari, or if you're interested, you got a little bit more information on that. Mm-hmm. And really kind of understand that now is a great time to be accessing those deeper layers, because we're setting the foundation for what comes next. And if that foundation isn't set, that horse is going to take off and it's going to buck us off, which is why we're listening right now. And we're doing this work on ourselves, and we're also offering it in our own practices.
Yes.
Take care, and we'll catch you next time. Next week, we're going to be doing some awesome grid work in Hawaii. So we might have some updates for you here.
Yeah.
Take care.